Why did the environment say to the unmanaged solution, every time you leave, you always leave such a mess? Watch this video and find out why.
Hello, governors. Welcome back to another episode of Power Squared. We're your hosts, Charles and Josh, and today we're going to be talking about solutions in Power Platform. So let's jump straight into it. Charles, what is a solution?
So in Power Platform, we talked about environments in a previous video. So if you don't know what environments are, that's probably the first place to start. And then once you know about environments, the next level down is solutions. And solutions are something that I think confuse people quite a bit, because you would typically think of it as being like a folder that you put all of your things into. So all of your Power Platform elements, like your apps and your flows and whatever bits and pieces you have, you put them into this folder. But I think that if you're thinking about it as a folder, you could potentially miss the mark, because there's a big difference between unmanaged solutions and managed solutions. And they're not to be confused with managed environments, which is a completely different concept. So if someone's talking about managed environments, it's nothing to do with solutions. If someone's talking about managed or unmanaged solutions, it's nothing to do with environments. So an unmanaged solution is like a reference to particular components that you have in Power Platform. So when you add an app to an unmanaged solution, that unmanaged solution is referring to an app that does not exist inside the solution. But when it's a managed solution, that solution actually is holding on to that app and is in control of that app. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good way to kind of put it. I think the way I almost try and think about it as well is kind of going back to that folder analogy to some degree, and saying like an unmanaged solution is like an open book, right? You can kind of, read it, view it, add things to it, do whatever you want to, really. It's just there as that kind of reference, like you mentioned. But your managed solution is that production ready kind of side of things, which is that folder, but it's got red tape all around it. You can't open it, you can't change it. It exists as is. And if you want to change that, you're going to have to go back to the unmanaged version and change that. So yeah, it's a good way to kind of think about it. But I think as you're kind of talking through solutions, you start to realize actually there's a lot of layers to this. There's more than just, this kind of container where you can put things. So yeah, great kind of start, I think, to kind of really get our teeth stuck into this. So looking forward to see what else we can kind of unpick in today's episode.
So let's say I have these two solutions. So one in one environment, one in the other. In my first environment, I have an unmanaged solution, and I have all my bits and pieces in there. I have an app and a few flows and things like that. And I decide that I don't want that anymore. So I think to myself, I'll just delete that solution, right? So I delete the unmanaged solution. But then when I go and have a look, actually everything still exists other than the solution itself. And that's what I was trying to get at with that point of it being just a reference. It's not holding on to them. Whereas if we go and we delete our managed solution, that deletes the apps and the flows that were within inside it, right? And you mentioned the word layer, Josh. Can you tell us a bit more about layers? Like, we hear this word layers with solutions. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so you've got this concept of solution layering in Power Platform. So you might have, a solution in the terms of not as a kind of one thing, more as a, you've built multiple apps, multiple flows, but they exist across multiple solutions. Solution layering kind of comes in because you can have multiple Power Platform solutions kind of one on top of the other to provide kind of further customization and to kind of fine tune kind of what's being changed. So the way to see it is if you've got this kind of like almost like pyramid effectively, you've got the base solution at the bottom, maybe that's got some tables in it. And then your next solution on top of that, you've got the apps that reference those tables. Then on top of that, you've maybe got some flows or some kind of more kind of bespoke customization. So you start building this kind of concept of, rather than putting everything in one solution and creating this really large solution, which can be probably maybe a little bit kind of trickier to manage. If we think back to almost like a document store or something, the more things you put in, the harder it can be to kind of manage. That's the same kind of solution. So you might want to break it up into smaller chunks, and that's where your layering comes into play. Would you agree with that kind of concept?
Yeah, that makes sense. And so let's say that we have two solutions that we're going to move from development into production. And those two solutions both have the same app inside them. So we import solution A and then we import solution B. So then our app in the production environment will have two layers, yeah? A and B will be the one on top of A. Therefore, that's the one that takes priority.
Yeah, that's right.
And so when we're talking about managed solutions, we mentioned the fact that that's actually holding on to everything and it's basically restricting you from customizing things, right? But it's not as simple as that, is it?
No, there are ways around that in that you can add layers on top of a managed solution to create an unmanaged layer, which isn't really a recommended thing, but obviously it's possible. You might want to bring in a hotfix or do some sort of bug testing, and that might be a valid reason to import like an unmanaged solution on top of your kind of managed solution to create this kind of unmanaged layer kind of hierarchy. So there are reasons behind it, but yeah, it's important to kind of understand why you would do it. But typically it's not something I think many people would be doing or should be doing. But yeah, you can do it, and you do run the risk of things going wrong if you start kind of messing around with things in that way.
One of the things I've seen in the past is where you've had a managed solution and people realize that if you go to apps and you click on the app, you can still edit the app through that, even if you're not going through the solution. And they've gone to edit the app to have a look at it. They've maybe mistakenly saved it or something like that. They've created an unmanaged layer. And then when the people who are developing it have gone to deploy it, it hasn't worked properly and it's caused so much confusion. And it's because they've been looking at it in production. And so really, if we're looking at this from a governance angle, we want to stop that kind of thing from happening. And we have a setting for that in the admin center.
Yeah, we can block, what's it called again? Block unmanaged customizations. Is that the right way?
That's right.
Yeah.
Shall I get my screen up with that on the screen so that people can see it?
And just whilst you're bringing that up, I guess it's important to mention as well that with a managed solution, every change that you make or bring into your kind of environment as a managed solution, you're going to get a new version number. And this is a great way to kind of keep audit and history of everything that's changed in that solution. So we're going to start kind of breaching or branching into those kind of more application lifecycle management kind of principles around version control. But yeah, even as a citizen developer or a maker, just solutionizing everything to begin with, it's a great practice to have because you're not having everything everywhere.
What we're looking at here is the admin center, of course. I've gone into manage environments and then I've clicked on an environment. And then we can go to settings at the top and then product and then features. And features is a huge page and you have to scroll down really far near to the bottom. And then we've got this here, block unmanaged customizations. So this is where we can then block unmanaged customizations in the environment. So when we have a production environment, I would say it's best practice to enable that to stop people from tinkering and potentially causing some issues.
Yeah, definitely one to watch out for. If you've got production environments and you've got that switched off, you might want to try and think around justification as to why it's switched off and potentially switching it on. Because that will definitely help in keeping things more governed and managed in that production environment.
We've discussed the unmanaged and managed. We've discussed the layering. Have we discussed dependencies at all?
We haven't touched on that yet, but definitely a good one to speak about because I don't know about you, but for me, dependencies is one of the things that always catch me out within solutions. It's the one thing that, at the end of a long day, you've made all of these kind of changes to your solution. You just want to hit import into your target environment and then it's blocked because there's a dependency. So it's something that always catches me out. For our viewers, it's pretty important to kind of let them know what a dependency is, how it kind of plays into.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
How can we need to put it in the plainest language possible because the word itself doesn't necessarily tell you exactly what it means.
I can have a go at trying to explain this in plain, simple language, but let's see if it works. When I think of a dependency, I think of I have a solution, I have all of my components in a solution, but let's say that solution uses a table that is an out-of-the-box table that you maybe need to install in a target environment separately as part of a different kind of part of the provisioning process. But that table doesn't exist in your downstream environment. So when I then go to import this solution, it's going to flag up and say, whoa, you can't install this solution yet because you're missing these components from your target environment. Go and fix that before importing. Once you've done that, import and it'll work again. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I also think of it as like, let's say that someone who is new to Power Platform didn't realize you should be using solutions. And so they've already built something. They add their app to their solution, and then they go to import it into another environment. And it comes up with a dependency issue because it says that the flow is missing that they're referring to in the app. So that app is depending on that flow. It needs that flow in order to be used. So you have to add the flow to the solution as well. And then it's got the dependency that it required, and then it's able to be moved through. So you're depending on something existing, something being there in order to operate.
Yeah. And I think the interface for kind of that dependency management's come quite a long way in the kind of past year, because previously it was quite difficult to kind of find what the dependency was or, how to add it. Whereas now it's a lot more intuitive, it'll find the dependencies, and if they're missing, it will let you just add them there and then, which it didn't do before. So it has come a long way in terms of usability compared to kind of how it used to be, which I think is nice.
And from a maker perspective, we've now got something to help us with making sure that people do put things into solutions, which is the preferred solution. So admin can turn that on for an environment, and then the makers themselves can choose their preferred solution, or it could be automated by the admin. And then it means that anything that you build in that environment will get automatically put into that solution if you're not building it from a solution in the first place. The way that I think this is really useful is in the productivity or the default environment. You can turn that on. Everyone can then have their own preferred solutions. And then it means that if you ever need to move them out of there, then it's so quick and easy to do that. Whereas if you just leave people building in productivity outside of solutions, when you want to move those, that's a huge headache for you.
That feels like a really good way of kind of governing the madness as a default environment as well, doesn't it? I think, having preferred solutions allows people to get everything into that one solution and out of the default environment kind of a bit more easily than trying to just figure out what's what. So yeah, I think, one of if anything you learn from today, it's definitely trying to use preferred solutions and default if you can.
Yeah. And I think even with, say, developer environments, they can be so useful because you'll have people playing around in a developer environment. Ideally, those people would be just using separate solutions for their different business processes. But if they're not, at least then everything gets put into a solution. So if they do need to move away from that developer environment, then they can do that easily. And of course, developer environments can expire and be deleted. So maybe you want some kind of backup process or something like that. So you could automatically back up that preferred solution, which would contain everything that person's built. So yeah, lots of interesting concepts and ideas there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's starting to become kind of clear in my head, if, I wasn't aware of all this stuff, is the kind of benefits solutions bring to your workflow. If I was a citizen developer, a maker, just starting out and I'm, typically just going into apps or flows and just creating one, blissfully unaware of solutions, this now kind of makes me aware of what a solution is and why I should be using it. Being able to kind of bring all of my kind of Power Platform components together in this one kind of space, it just makes sense. But it also means that as my app maybe matures, if it's maybe something that's becoming more and more popular, it's going to be used by more and more people, wrapping that in kind of proper governance processes then becomes a lot more easier, rather than starting with the kind of just a non-solutionized version, right? So that, the benefits are real, and it's very minimal effort to get started with solutions. So it should be something that everyone's aware of and should just start using straight away, in my opinion.
And also, when you're building something in Power Platform, how often is it just one thing? Like you just build an app and it has nothing else in Power Platform with it. It's basically never. You'll always have some environment variables or Power Automate flows or maybe Dataverse tables. There'll always be something that you'll want to go with it. Or it might even be multiple apps. So when you've got all of these things, you really want to know which things belong with which. You don't want to just build them all and they all exist in an environment. But if you have them in solutions, you then know all of these things belong together, which is really important.
And once you've created a solution, you can create your components directly within the solution. It's so easy. You just go into your solution, pick new or add existing, pick what component you want, and off you go. It's as easy as that. So in my mind, it makes it a lot easier to use them. I guess there is a caveat to that, though, right? In that we've talked about all of these components that we can add to solutions, but not everything can be added to solution. Not everything's solution aware in Power Platform. Although there's been a lot of effort over the past kind of year or so to make more and more things solutionizable, if that's even a word. Not everything, typically more legacy things, I feel, could be added to solutions. Can you think of anything off the top of your head that can be added?
So there was some work done towards Power BI and trying to make it so that would be solution aware, and that fell by the wayside. Data flows are sort of halfway there. Like, you can add them to a solution, but they're not really fully ALM compatible. Any others?
Those were the two that were kind of sticking out in my mind. There's definitely others. I was trying to think about things like kind of more dynamics templates or that kind of thing, but I think they can be solutionized, email templates, that kind of thing. But there's definitely other more legacy things that can be added in, and things that people aren't really using day to day. I mean, up until recently, you couldn't solutionize Power Pages. A lot of that stuff wasn't able to get added in, but we can do that now. You can have Power Page solutions, and it's a lot more robust in managing Power Pages now because we can solutionize it. And being a very unique kind of technology has a lot of components with it. So being able to put that in a solution and include that in any application lifecycle kind of process is pretty big. So yeah, it's good to see more and more things get added. What about things like functions? Can they be solutionized? Are they solutionizable?
Yeah, like Dataverse functions, they can be. Yeah, Dataverse plugins, so the C# plugins, they can be. Pretty much everything can be, bar just a couple of exceptions. Do you know, one of the things that we haven't mentioned, which I've just realized would be very confusing to someone new to Power Platform, is the Dataverse data. So they might be thinking, I package up my solution, I move it across, and everything goes with it, but not realizing that the data does not travel with the solution. The data remains in the environment. And that's something that's really important to bear in mind. And of course, you don't necessarily want the data to travel because you're developing and you're testing. You don't want that to go into production, and you want your production data to be completely separate from when you're messing around with things.
Yeah. That's a really good point, isn't it? And yeah, data doesn't come across. There are other tools that allow you to migrate data, or you can generate data with AI nowadays. But yeah, it doesn't come across by default. It's the metadata or table metadata and schema that comes across when you're talking in relation to kind of tables and Dataverse that come through. And I guess I just wanted to kind of go back to one of the points around using solutions, because as someone starting out, you might say, well, why should I do this? I'm just creating an app that's tapping into SharePoint, for example. That typical starting point for a lot of people in Power Apps. And I think one of the key things there is that if you're using SharePoint, you're going to create a connection reference to SharePoint. And right away there, we have two components, but you're not aware of that by default. We've got a connection reference to SharePoint. And if you have a solution, that connection reference gets created in that solution. So it's going to be easier to connect to and obviously keep everything together. So something really important, and that solutions are for everyone. They're not just a kind of pro developer, fusion development kind of concept. They're for everyone. And the benefits are, you start small with this stuff and you scale out, and those principles apply to this as well.
And with the SharePoint concept, so if you're developing your app and you're communicating with SharePoint, you're going to, again, going back to the test data, you're going to be messing around with data. When you then deploy your app into production, you don't want to talk to that same SharePoint list because that's your list with all your dummy data in. It's no good. Or the other way around, you don't want your development app to be talking to your production SharePoint list. So that's when you'd be using environment variables, which is where you can specify this is the value for this environment, and it will change per environment. So that means you'd have multiple SharePoint sites or multiple SharePoint lists, but it means that everything's segregated and safe. And so it sounds like a very pro concept, but really it's something that everyone should be doing. And it's not actually that complicated, is it?
Very easy to do. And, the documentation is really clear, but I feel like it's quite intuitive to get started with solutions as well. You just hit new solution, call your solution what you want. Typically, I would call it, based off of the thing that I'm actually creating. If it's a holiday tracker, then, holiday tracker or something like that. The only thing that you need to add is a, what they called is it publisher. That's the word I was looking for. You need to add a publisher, but that isn't a massive thing. It's just basically when you create a solution, anything that you put into that solution is going to get a prefix of that publisher. Think of it as, if you're a software developer, Kamiko or something daft like that, anything that you create is going to just have that prefix attached to it so that, you know kind of who created it, which is really good. One thing I did want to ask, and if, I think it will come up probably quite frequently, is Solutions free? Is there a license needed for Solutions?
Solutions are completely free. Yeah, you can use them. There's no license needed. Yeah, that's it, isn't it?
Nice and easy. Brilliant. So, yeah, I think that might be something that catch people out as well. As they might think, can do this. It feels maybe it's kind of coming out of that kind of basic kind of starting point. But no, actually, this should be included in that. There's no cost implications for using Solutions. So, yeah, get going with them and get used to them, because you're gonna kind of level your skill set up by doing Solutions and understanding them compared to someone that doesn't, I think.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add on to the using of Solutions. People might be thinking, well, how do I actually use them? So we should probably just give a quick demo as to how they actually work. What do you think?
I think so. I think our viewers would love that.
So we're in make.powerapps.com. You can be in Power Automate. You can be in Copilot Studio, Power Pages. Yeah, Power Platform, basically. And then on the left-hand side, you will have Solutions. And so when you go into Solutions, you'll initially see all of your unmanaged solutions. You can change the filter to managed, or you can change it to all to see everything that you have within the environment that you are permitted to see. And then at the top here, we've got new solution and import solution. And so the point of this is that when you have created your solution in your development environment and you want it to then move to another environment, you would want to export that solution. So basically send it out as a download for you to use as an artifact. And then you would want to import it into whichever solution you're going to. So let's create a new solution. So we can just call this test solution for now. And then, Josh, as you said there, we've got publisher, so you can choose different publishers. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention on the publisher front is that sometimes you can have issues with publisher discrepancies. I can't remember exactly the issue with it, whether it's to do with the prefix or something along those lines. But basically, the general gist of it is that in an ideal world, in your organization, you would just use the same publisher for everything. And then that avoids those potential issues in the future. So what we can do when we're creating this new solution is we can also set it as our preferred solution. So that's something that we talked about before. Well, that takes you to Microsoft Learn to read more about it. And we have more options here where you can set a configuration page and you can write a description for that. Writing a description isn't a bad idea because then that can show up in different areas like the starter kit. So then we go and create our solution. So this is our unmanaged solution. So anything we put into here, we're just referring to it. It doesn't actually exist in this. And then once it's been created, we can then go to new and we can add new things to it or create new things for it. So we've got Dataverse tables, we've got apps and agents, and we can do the same thing with adding existing ones. And then once we've created everything that we want in our solution and we're ready to put it somewhere, we can then go to the overview of the solution. We could publish all the customizations just in case we're not sure if everything's been published, and then we can export it. And it's a simple step process that you go through. You can publish all changes from there as well. And you can click on next, and then it checks for missing components. So this is where we were talking about the dependency issues. So if it's depending on something and it can't find it in the solution, it will tell you about that there. And then you can specify whether it should be managed or unmanaged. And then you export. It will take its time to export, and then you'll get a download for it. And then that download, you can then go into the environment where you want to bring it into, and you go to solutions and you go to import solution, and then you find the file that you downloaded. And that is the manual process for moving solutions from A to B. So that could be from development to production, or it could be from development to test to pre-production to production. Whatever strategy you're using, it doesn't matter. You can use the same concept. And that is just manual movement of solutions. But of course, there's this whole other ball game of automated movement of solutions, which is called application lifecycle management.
Yeah, and that's definitely something we'll want to cover in a future video. I think there's a lot to unpick around automating these deployments. One thing I just want to kind of call out there when you're doing that export of the solution is that version. You can see there when Charles was going through it, it automatically incremented the version from 1.0.0.0 to 1.0.0.0.1. And anytime you edit that unmanaged solution, it's going to automatically increment it. So what do we mean by that? Basically, what that means is, let's say, for example, you've got a flow and you're working on the flow. You've done your kind of initial version. You've kind of done what you need to do with it. You're now looking to kind of push that into maybe your test environment to run some tests on that. That would be your kind of 1.0.0.1 version. But actually, hang on a minute, we want to add another step into that flow. So we go back to our unmanaged solution, we make our changes, we save the flow, publish the flow, and hit export again. You'll then see that increment will now be 1.0.0.2 instead. So every change, every time you hit that export button, it's going to do a version increment. And that is going to how things kind of maintain their kind of way, so to speak, so that if anything goes wrong, you can't go back to a previous version, but you have to kind of fix forwards. And what I mean by that is if that change you made isn't right or something's gone wrong, you just remove that step from your flow, save, publish it again, and that then becomes 1.0.0.3 instead. So you can't revert to the previous version, you just got to fix forward. I think that's something that's quite important. Maybe a little bit kind of something we can maybe cover in our future ALM video, but I think something to be aware of instead. You can't go back to a previous version like you'd maybe expect on these things.
That's a great point. And when it comes to ALM, so we've shown the manual process and we've mentioned that there's an automated process, but there are multiple automated processes ranging from relatively straightforward up to extremely complex. And I think it's important, whether you're a maker, a developer, or someone who's working in governance, to be aware of the different versions and the implications of all of them as well.
Completely agree. I think when it comes to that ALM kind of side of things, there's so much to consider. But if you're working in an organization and you haven't considered that yet, probably something to kind of think about and push kind of high up on the agenda, because that's going to make your life as a governance kind of admin, or, as a governor, a lot more easier when it comes to kind of dealing with these mass deployments and scaling out Power Platform, because you need to have a robust kind of release strategy for all of these solutions, no matter how big, and having a kind of robust way to deploy, fallback, store, all of that kind of stuff when it comes to solutions is a real kind of game changer in this space. And as Charles mentioned, we can get really simple with this and get, the kind of starting point, the kind of walking part, versus the really complex, traditional pro dev bit, which is your kind of running point when we're talking things that aren't just Power Platform. So there's loads of options there to consider. So yeah, worth thinking about as part of your governance journey.
Absolutely. So that's everything that we have to talk about on solutions for now, so that we don't explode your brains. But what I would love to, or what we would both love to hear about in the chat, in the comments, is what would you like us to explain in the future? Have we missed something on solutions that you're aware of that we should have covered? And just generally tell us how you think the series is going and any ideas and feedback, because we're very interested to hear it. We're really enjoying talking about these topics. We're really enjoying the amount of views that we get. We want a bit more engagement, I think would be nice, so that we can understand how can we best serve you, because we've got so many things that we've got plans to cover, and so many things that we're interested to know are you interested in. So yeah, thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.